Good morning, guys. That's episode 3 of Contracts that you just joined me on. Glad to have you back. So we've talked about the nature of what a contract is, what it does, what it takes to make one, right? Now we're going to talk about different ways of classifying them, which means placing them in categories. And each of these will be reminiscent. The definitions will be sort of moldable by you. They're generally applicable principles that you can use, right, when you're confronted with a fact pattern, right? So we'll start with a couple of examples, right, to kind of start this off, all right? So Javier offers to buy Anne's smartphone for $200. Javier tells Anne that he will give her the cash for the phone on the following Friday when he gets paid. Anne accepts Javier's offer and promises to give him the phone when he pays her on Friday. Right? They've made this agreement today. Javier promised to pay her $200 on Friday. She promised to give him the phone on Friday. It's Monday. Javier and Anne have a contract. That contract is known as a bilateral contract. Look on the presentation where it starts with types of contracts. Bilateral contracts essentially involve a promise for a promise. Javier makes one promise, I will give you $200 on Friday, and makes a return promise. I will give you my phone on Friday when I am paid, right? Another example. Reese says to Kay, if you drive my car from New York to Los Angeles, I'll give you $1,000. Only on Kay's completion of the act, bringing the car to Los Angeles, does she accept Reese's offer to pay the $1,000. If she chooses not to accept the offer and drive the car to Los Angeles, there are no legal consequences. Kay is not bound until, obviously, she takes possession of Reese's car. And then she's obligated to deliver it, obviously, but really she's not obligated to do anything when the promise is made. It's a unilateral contract. Unilateral contracts differ from bilateral contracts because this is a case of promise for performance. Promise for performance means that you get the benefit of what I am promising once you do what I tell you to do. You get your allowance once you clean up your room, for example, is an example of a unilateral type contract. Okay, so bilateral and unilateral contracts are what I would describe as a couplet. They go together, right? A contract is either one or the other. So one way to sort of organize your thinking about this is to place bilateral and unilateral together and then understand the definition of one in relation to the other, all right? So this brings us to our next couplet, which is formal contracts versus informal contracts. Formal contracts are only those that are required to be in a certain form, right? And those are fairly limited, right? But they are significant, right? Like contracts for real estate or involving certain financial transactions with banks or, for example, the aforementioned checks. So the formal category, although small, is significant. The vast majority of contracts are informal contracts, meaning simply that they have no specific formality requirements or recitations that have to appear or in a certain setup, right? So again, our next couplet would be express contracts versus implied contracts. So the easy case is the express contract. That's any contract that's formed from words, any words, whether they're oral or written or, scrawled in blood across the wall, a horror movie. But if they're formed from words, whether we're speaking or in any other sort of way of communicating words, that is an express contract, and its proofs will be the elements of the contract, however they were laid out, right? An implied contract is from deeds, right? What did the parties do, right? And so to say that a contract is formed from deeds is to say that the parties behaved in such a way that the that a contract is understood to exist, right? And so the example that I like to use is I walk into the same coffee shop every morning. Every day I get some kind of little knickknack and coffee or tea. All right. So, one day I'm kind of heading out and I'm in a big hurry because I'm running late and the place is crowded, totally packed, wall to wall. Right. So I don't have time for this. I grab my snack, I grab my coffee, I turn at the owner whom I know, right? She sees me every day, right? Wave, I'll be back. Or even not say anything at all. I wave, we acknowledge each other. She sees I've got the stuff, right? And I just head out, right? Have I stolen from my neighbor? No. In this case, what I've done is we have entered into an implied contract. How do we know? I go into this place every day, right? I do a similar transaction of relatively similar value every day that I'm working, right? As a, it's understood, even though I didn't say, can I pay you for this later? And she didn't say, yes, you may pay this for me when you return, right? We have a contract that's implied and it's actually enforceable against me, right? So if she had to come at me and sue me for it, we know three things. One, she, the plaintiff, furnished some service or property. Two, she expects to be paid, right? And I knew it, right? And then three, I didn't have to take the muffin and the coffee. I could have rejected the service, but I accepted it, right? Because of this, that is plenty to form an implied contract. And there's a couple of other examples in the book if you'd like some other kind of reference points for that. Interesting, though, is what happens when a contract has both express and implied terms. And so for this, I would direct you to your case 10.5. It was a case example, pardon me. And so Lamar Hopkins hired Orhan Construction for a construction project, and their contract explicitly, meaning their express provision, stated that all modifications to this contract have to be made in writing in order to be legally effective. So that's the starting point, right? During the course of the contract, however, the plaintiff requested numerous deviations from the contract, which the contractor happily incorporated, right? He requested these changes, and the contractor billed for these changes, and the plaintiff paid for these changes. Came to a point in the project where the plaintiff requested Durasol cinder blocks instead of the blocks that were being used. He said that the blocks cost about the same price. The contractor buys the Durasol blocks, right? And I guess they're relatively equivalent, right? But for this deviation, he notes that these blocks are far more complicated to install, takes more time, more labor. He requests that the plaintiff pay additional, right? The defendant in this case pay additional, not the plaintiff, right? He bills Hopkins for the Durasol blocks. Hopkins refuses. He sues, and the court says that, by his behavior, he had waived his objection to having contract modifications only in writing. What is a waiver? A waiver is simply some action by a party to a contract that validates a provision of that contract not being lived up to, right? So it validates a promise not being kept, right? So what would that action be? In this case, he requested contract deviations that weren't in writing, and he accepted changes in pricing that weren't in writing in order to get it, which means that that provision couldn't have the same effect, right? And if this one was like the other ones that he'd already sort of deviated with, then in fact, that implied term that the Duracell blocks have to be paid for, and including the labor, goes with the express terms of the contract. So it's a contract with express and mixed terms. All right. So chew on that for a bit. Take a look at the prompt and let me know what you think.